Most people believe they lose control because life is overwhelming. Too much work, too much pressure, too many responsibilities. That is the story they tell themselves. Marcus Aurelius would not have accepted it. Not because life was easier in his time, but because he understood something uncomfortable. Most people do not lose control because life is hard. They lose control because they refuse to take responsibility for their inner life. This is not an accusation. It is an observation. Notice how quickly the mind looks outward for explanations. The schedule is too busy. The world is too chaotic. People are too demanding. But very rarely does the mind say, "I have allowed myself to become undisciplined." That admission feels threatening, because if the problem is external, there is nothing you must change. But if the problem is internal, the responsibility returns to you. Most people avoid this moment. They prefer exhaustion to self-examination, distraction to clarity, noise to honesty, and slowly, control erodes. Not in dramatic collapse, but in daily surrender. Marcus Aurelius warned himself against this exact pattern. He did not write about enemies destroying the mind. He wrote about habits weakening it, small compromises, staying mentally passive, letting attention drift, reacting without reflection. Over time, these choices form a character that feels busy, but inwardly unstable. The modern world makes this easier than ever. You are constantly stimulated, constantly occupied, constantly reacting. And because you are always responding to something, you rarely stop to ask, "Who is directing my mind?" This is the uncomfortable truth. If you are constantly overwhelmed, it is not because life is attacking you. It is because your inner boundaries are weak. This does not mean you are broken. It means you are untrained. And untrained systems behave exactly as expected. They collapse under pressure. Marcus Aurelius believed that the mind, left unattended, does not remain neutral. It drifts toward comfort, toward avoidance, toward emotional ease. But comfort is not stability. In fact, comfort often becomes the enemy of strength. Most people confuse relief with freedom. They think that avoiding discomfort is the same as protecting themselves. But avoidance has a cost. Every time you avoid inner discipline, you trade long-term stability for short-term relief. And the mind remembers this trade. It learns that resistance is optional, that attention is disposable, that reaction is easier than restraint. This is how control is lost, not through trauma, not through catastrophe, but through repetition. The repetition of choosing ease over order. Marcus Aurelius would have called this a failure of duty, not duty to others, but duty to oneself. Because if you cannot govern your inner world, you will forever feel governed by circumstances. This is why Stoicism begins with honesty, not comfort, not reassurance, honesty. And honesty often feels like confrontation. In the next part, we will examine why distraction is not something done to you, but something you quietly cooperate with, every day. For now, sit with this idea. If you feel out of control, it may not be because life is unfair. It may be because you have not demanded enough of yourself. Pause here. Let the discomfort speak. Then continue. Most people talk about distraction as if it were an attack, as if something external invaded their mind and stole their focus against their will. Marcus Aurelius would not have agreed. He would have asked a far simpler question: why do you allow it? Distraction is rarely forced, it is invited. You reach for it in moments of discomfort, in moments of boredom, in moments where attention would require effort. And the mind learns quickly. It learns that whenever something feels demanding, escape is available. This is not weakness. It is conditioning. But conditioning still has consequences. Every time you choose distraction, you teach your mind that it does not need to endure, that it does not need to remain with difficulty, that it does not need to finish what it starts. Over time, this erodes attention, and without attention, control becomes impossible. Marcus Aurelius warned himself not about temptation, but about softness, not the softness of kindness, but the softness of avoidance, because avoidance always feels reasonable in the moment. I'll deal with this later. I'm too tired to think clearly. I just need a break. And sometimes that is true, but most of the time it is habit speaking. The modern world offers endless ways to disappear, not physically, mentally. You can be present in a room and completely absent from your own experience. And the more often you disappear, the weaker your inner authority becomes. Distraction is not neutral. It reshapes the mind. It shortens patience, weakens memory, increases emotional volatility. Small frustrations feel heavier. Silence feels uncomfortable. Stillness feels threatening. Marcus Aurelius believed that the mind must be trained to remain with what is difficult, not because difficulty is noble, but because escape creates fragility. A mind that cannot stay with discomfort will seek relief in reaction, and reaction always gives control away. Most people believe freedom means doing whatever they want. Stoicism offers a different definition. Freedom means being able to choose restraint when indulgence is available. If you cannot refuse distraction, you are not free. You are simply compliant. This is where the discomfort deepens, because most people do not want to admit how often they choose what weakens them. They prefer to believe they are victims of circumstance. But Marcus Aurelius would have said, "What you repeatedly allow becomes who you are." This is not a moral judgment. It is a mechanical one. The mind follows the paths it travels most often. If those paths lead away from discipline, discipline fades. In the next part, we will confront a harder distinction: the difference between emotional weakness and emotional laziness. The line is uncomfortable, but it explains much of what people call losing control. Pause here and notice what you reach for when attention becomes uncomfortable. Then continue. Most people describe themselves as emotionally weak. They say they are overwhelmed, too sensitive, too reactive. Marcus Aurelius would have questioned this language, not to shame, but to clarify. Because weakness implies a lack of ability, and in most cases, that is not the problem. The problem is avoidance. Emotional weakness is when someone genuinely lacks capacity, when they are exhausted, when they are wounded, when they are temporarily unable to respond with strength. Emotional laziness is different. It is when capacity exists, but is consistently unused, when reflection is possible, but avoided, when restraint is available, but inconvenient. This distinction matters, because weakness deserves patience, but laziness requires honesty. Most people prefer the first label. It is softer, less demanding. But Marcus Aurelius did not speak to himself softly. He spoke truthfully. He reminded himself that feeling an emotion does not excuse surrendering to it. Anger is natural. Indulgence is optional. Fear is human. Panic is learned. Sadness arises. Rumination is chosen. This is where discomfort sharpens, because once you recognize the difference, you can no longer hide behind confusion. You begin to see patterns. You notice how often you say, "I can't help it," when in reality, you have simply stopped trying to help yourself. Emotional laziness does not look dramatic. It looks reasonable. I'm too tired to think. I just need to vent. I deserve this reaction. And each time, a small abdication takes place. Marcus Aurelius warned himself about self-indulgence disguised as self-care, because indulgence feels compassionate, but often leaves the mind weaker than before. Stoicism is not hostile to emotion. It is hostile to unexamined emotion. The Stoic does not ask, "Why do I feel this?" He asks, "What am I doing with it?" Because emotion alone is not the problem. What follows emotion is. Most people believe strength means never feeling deeply. Stoicism teaches something harder. Strength means feeling fully and still choosing restraint. This requires effort, and effort is exactly what emotional laziness avoids. Marcus Aurelius understood that the mind prefers ease. Left alone, it will always choose the path of least resistance. That is not a flaw, it is a function. But if you do not guide the mind, it will guide you toward weakness while convincing you it is rest. This is why most people feel tired even when they do nothing demanding. They are constantly reacting, justifying, and excusing. That mental friction drains energy. True discipline, by contrast, creates relief because it simplifies. It reduces internal conflict. It replaces chaos with order. In the next part, we will confront a belief even more dangerous: the idea that freedom means escape, and why most people lose control precisely when they believe they are being free. Pause here. Ask yourself one question. Honestly, where have I mistaken indulgence for necessity? Then continue. Most people say they want freedom, but what they usually mean is relief. Relief from pressure, relief from effort, relief from responsibility. Marcus Aurelius would have found this confusion dangerous, because freedom and escape are not the same thing. Escape feels good immediately. Freedom feels stable over time. Escape avoids discomfort. Freedom endures it without collapse. But the modern mind is trained to choose escape. When something feels heavy, it looks for release. When responsibility appears, it looks for distance. And slowly, this habit reshapes the meaning of freedom itself. Freedom becomes the absence of demands, the absence of structure, the absence of inner resistance. But this version of freedom produces the opposite result. It creates dependence. Dependence on stimulation, dependence on distraction, dependence on emotional release. Marcus Aurelius understood that a mind without structure does not become free. It becomes fragile. Without inner order, every external demand feels oppressive. Every challenge feels unfair. Every expectation feels like control. This is why many people feel trapped even when no one is restricting them. They are not imprisoned by circumstances. They are imprisoned by their inability to tolerate effort. True freedom requires constraint, not external constraint, but self-chosen limits. The ability to say no, the ability to remain still, the ability to endure discomfort without dramatizing it. This is not popular today because escape is marketed as liberation. You deserve this. Follow every impulse. Never deny yourself. Marcus Aurelius would have rejected this logic, not because pleasure is immoral, but because unchecked indulgence weakens judgment. A mind trained only to seek comfort loses its capacity for direction, and without direction, freedom becomes aimless movement. Most people feel restless, not because they lack opportunity, but because they lack inner authority. They are free to choose, but unable to choose wisely. This is the cost of confusing freedom with escape. The Stoic seeks a different freedom, not freedom from effort, but freedom within effort. The freedom to act deliberately instead of compulsively. The freedom to respond instead of react. The freedom to endure difficulty without losing self-respect. Marcus Aurelius believed that discipline expands freedom because discipline reduces dependency. When you are disciplined, you do not need constant stimulation. You do not need constant validation. You do not need constant emotional release. You are sufficient. This sufficiency is what most people are searching for without knowing it, and they look for it in escape. In the next part, we will examine the long-term cost of avoiding inner discipline and why many people wake up years later feeling quietly diminished. Pause here. Ask yourself, where have I called escape freedom? Then continue. The cost of avoiding inner discipline is rarely paid immediately. That is why it is so easy to ignore. There is no instant punishment, no dramatic collapse, just a slow erosion. Marcus Aurelius understood that the greatest losses are often invisible while they are happening. You do not wake up one day having lost control of your mind. You wake up one day and realize you no longer trust yourself. You hesitate more. You delay decisions. You second-guess what once felt clear. Not because life became harder, but because your inner structure weakened. Avoiding discipline feels harmless in the short term. You skip reflection. You indulge reaction. You choose ease over effort. Nothing breaks, but something changes. Your standards lower quietly. What once felt unacceptable now feels normal. What once required effort now feels exhausting. Marcus Aurelius warned himself against this drift, not because he feared failure, but because he feared becoming careless with himself. Carelessness toward the mind always produces consequences. You become less precise in thought, less patient in conflict, less resilient under pressure, and eventually you begin to compensate. You blame circumstances. You blame people. You blame time. But the real loss happened earlier. It happened when you stopped demanding clarity from yourself. Inner discipline is not about control for its own sake. It is about self-respect. When you keep promises to yourself, even small ones, you build trust. When you repeatedly break them, that trust dissolves. And without self-trust, confidence becomes performance. Marcus Aurelius believed that dignity comes from alignment between intention and action. When those two drift apart, the mind feels unstable. You may still function. You may still succeed externally. But inwardly, something feels off. A quiet dissatisfaction. A sense of disconnection. This is not ambition calling for more. It is integrity calling for repair. Avoiding discipline does not make life lighter. It makes it heavier. Because every unexamined reaction adds friction. Every avoided responsibility adds tension. Every indulgence without awareness adds noise. And noise is exhausting. True discipline simplifies. It removes unnecessary conflict. It replaces chaos with order. Marcus Aurelius did not practice discipline to become exceptional. He practiced it to remain whole, to avoid becoming fragmented by impulse, emotion, and distraction. This is the cost most people pay without noticing. They lose inner coherence. And when coherence is gone, life feels scattered. In the next part, we will confront why Stoicism feels too hard for modern minds, and why that belief reveals more than it hides. Pause here. Ask yourself honestly, where have I avoided discipline and called it kindness? Then continue. Many people say Stoicism feels unrealistic, too strict, too cold, too demanding. Marcus Aurelius would not have been surprised by this reaction, because Stoicism does not promise comfort, it promises stability, and modern minds are trained to seek comfort first. The world you live in constantly reduces friction. Effort is minimized, waiting is eliminated. Discomfort is treated as a problem to be solved immediately. In this environment, inner discipline feels foreign, not because it is cruel, but because it requires endurance. Stoicism asks you to remain present when the impulse is to escape, to think clearly when emotion wants control, to hold yourself to standards even when no one else is watching. This feels too hard only because the mind has grown unused to effort. Marcus Aurelius lived without modern conveniences. Yet his greatest concern was not physical hardship. It was mental softness. He warned himself that luxury dulls perception, that ease weakens attention, that indulgence erodes restraint. These warnings feel uncomfortable today because they contradict popular narratives. You are told to follow every feeling, to validate every impulse, to express every emotion. Stoicism does not deny feeling. It denies surrender. The Stoic accepts emotion but refuses to be governed by it. This distinction is often misunderstood. People assume Stoicism means suppression, but suppression creates tension. Stoicism creates order. The modern mind struggles with this because it has learned to outsource regulation, to apps, to entertainment, to constant stimulation. When those supports disappear, anxiety appears. Not because life is unbearable, but because the mind has forgotten how to stand on its own. Marcus Aurelius believed the mind must be exercised. Just as muscles weaken without use, attention weakens without discipline, and discipline feels hard only until it becomes familiar. At first, restraint feels like loss. Later, it feels like relief, because the mind stops pulling itself apart. Stoicism does not ask you to become emotionless. It asks you to become reliable, reliable under pressure, reliable in judgment, reliable in action. This reliability is rare, and rarity is often mistaken for impossibility. In truth, Stoicism feels hard because it removes excuses. It leaves no one to blame but yourself, and that confrontation is uncomfortable. But it is also empowering, because once you accept responsibility for your inner world, no external chaos can fully destabilize you. In the next part, we will explore the silent decline of self-respect and why losing control of the mind often begins with abandoning standards. Pause here. Notice where you have dismissed discipline as too much. Then continue. Self-respect is rarely lost in a single moment. It fades quietly. There is no announcement, no clear signal, just a gradual lowering of standards that feels harmless at first. Marcus Aurelius understood this danger well. He warned himself that character does not collapse. It erodes. You stop holding yourself to small commitments. You excuse reactions you once questioned. You tolerate inner disorder because it feels familiar. And slowly, something changes. You begin to feel less grounded, less certain, less aligned with yourself. Not because you lack ability, but because you no longer expect it from yourself. Self-respect is built on consistency. When your actions repeatedly match your values, trust forms. When they do not, that trust weakens. Most people misunderstand this process. They think self-respect comes from achievement, from recognition, from success. Marcus Aurelius believed otherwise. He believed self-respect comes from integrity, from knowing that even when no one is watching, you are not betraying yourself. The silent decline begins when convenience replaces principle, when it becomes easier to justify than to correct. You tell yourself it doesn't matter, that no one will notice, that you'll do better tomorrow. And each time the inner voice grows quieter, not louder. It stops protesting. This is the most dangerous stage, because discomfort disappears, and without discomfort, there is no signal that something is wrong. Marcus Aurelius feared this state, not because he feared failure, but because he feared becoming indifferent to himself. Indifference is not peace, it is disengagement. When you lose self-respect, you often become more reactive, more defensive, more sensitive to external validation. Because the inner foundation is unstable, you begin to look outward for what should come from within: approval, reassurance, meaning. But no amount of external affirmation can restore what was abandoned internally. The Stoic path is not about perfection. It is about repair, about noticing when standards slip and calmly restoring them, without drama, without self-hatred. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself that self-respect is rebuilt the same way it is lost, quietly, through small, deliberate acts, by doing what you said you would do, by pausing instead of reacting, by choosing clarity over comfort. These actions may feel insignificant, but they accumulate, and over time, they restore weight to your words. When you respect yourself, you move differently. You speak more carefully. You react less impulsively. You tolerate less inner chaos, not because you are rigid, but because you are aligned. This alignment is what many people mistake for confidence, but it is deeper than that. It is coherence. In the final part, we will bring everything together, a confrontation, not with the world, but with yourself. A closing reflection on what it truly means to regain control of the mind. Pause here and ask yourself quietly, where have I lowered my standards and called it realism? Then continue. This is where the confrontation happens, not with society, not with circumstances, not with other people, with yourself. Marcus Aurelius believed that most suffering comes not from what happens to us, but from what we allow to happen inside us. And once you see that clearly, there is no one left to blame. This is uncomfortable because responsibility removes excuses. It takes away the comfort of victimhood, the safety of explanation, the ease of justification, and in its place, it offers something harder: choice. You begin to see how often you give your mind away to impulse, to emotion, to distraction, not because you must, but because it feels easier. But ease has never been neutral. Ease shapes character just as surely as effort does. Marcus Aurelius did not ask himself whether life was fair. He asked himself whether his response was worthy. That question changes everything. It shifts focus from control over outcomes to control over conduct, from reaction to judgment, from noise to clarity. This is the heart of Stoicism, not emotional numbness, not withdrawal from life, but presence, the ability to remain grounded while the world moves around you. Most people wait for life to become calmer before they demand discipline from themselves. Marcus Aurelius demanded discipline precisely because life was unstable. He understood that without inner order, external order is meaningless. So here is the final truth, stripped of comfort. If you do not govern your mind, something else will. Circumstances, people, emotions, habits. None of them care about your well-being. Only you do. And governance does not begin with grand transformation. It begins quietly, with noticing, with pausing, with choosing restraint where reaction is easier. You will not succeed every time. Marcus Aurelius did not expect himself to. He expected himself to return, again and again, to clarity, to discipline, to reason. That return is the practice, and it is always available. As this reflection comes to a close, do not promise yourself change. Promises fade. Instead, make a simpler commitment. Pay attention to your thoughts, to your reactions, to the moments where you surrender control without noticing. Attention is enough. With attention, discipline follows. With discipline, self-respect returns. And with self-respect, the mind becomes a place of order rather than conflict. Pause here. Take a breath. And remember, you are not your thoughts. You are the one who decides which thoughts deserve your obedience. That is where control begins.